Okay, this is the writer to the FARBAR class, writer M as in Mary, defective drywall. Now, what in the world, right? Well, so if you've been around the business long enough, there was a phase when we were building so fast, so furious in the early 2000s that the availability of drywall was not here, so we started importing. Builders started importing it from Chinese companies, and these Chinese drywall was not. It had issues basically. So there has been a special situation that's arisen, and it's something that needs to be inspected for. It's part of the seller's disclosure to the Florida Realtors Florida Bar contract, and so because of that, it is imperative that we are aware of it. Hopefully it will become less and less because these issues, as these properties have transferred over, have been addressed, but it's something you need to be aware of and make sure you're there. So let's read our introduction up here. If you're using this addendum, that's usually, there generally is some sort of a heads up that the property may have had Chinese drywall. It's not something you normally use. Here at Future Home Realty, we mandate that the sellers and encourage you always to try and get the FARBAR seller's disclosure utilized because it's a little lengthier, but it does cover things. It's all encompassing. It includes mold, Chinese drywall, etc. So you'll gonna make sure you use that because it would cover these things. But if you get a heads up and there's some things concerning Chinese drywall, I think you want to have the right to have it inspected. You need to pay attention to this, okay? So also pay attention down here when we get to the amounts that we're going to put in and the dates that we put in for our Chinese drywall inspection. And we'll note that here in a second. Also, I'll reference this below, but paragraph 1 is a spot for the seller to disclose. Realize, I'm going to start with this, that the seller has to be given a chance to disclose some things. Now, they should have done that in the seller's disclosure. If we're using this addendum, that means that we may have an indication that there is Chinese drywall or possibility of such. Here's another chance for the seller to disclose that. And this could be used against the seller if they failed to disclose properly. All right, but because of that, the buyer should not initial this until the seller has initiated the document, meaning we got to wait for them to fill this out before. You don't want to put the buyer's initials here until the seller has had a chance. Just like on any disclosure, you don't want to sign a blank disclosure. All right, so this means you can't provide a blank copy. You can provide a blank copy to the seller with limited items completed, things that you want in there, but you don't have the buyer initial it until the seller has completed paragraph 1 disclosure and the seller has initialed the document, because we want to be able to know what they've disclosed before the buyers agree to it. All right, so again, I reiterate that here. Do not have buyer initial until seller has completed disclosure in paragraph 1. All right. And this intro paragraph kind of discusses the issues surrounding Chinese drywall to your buyer. You should, let them read this and understand it and give them opportunity to make sure that they can go source other documents and talk to other professionals that are professionals specific to this. So during the time Florida was experiencing building material shortages, some homes were built or renovated using drywall imported from or manufactured in China or elsewhere, which reportedly emit levels of sulfur, methane, and or other volatile organic compounds that cause corrosion of air conditioning and refrigerator coils, copper tubing, electrical wiring, computer wiring, and other household items, as well as create noxious odors, which also may pose health risks. This is called defective drywall. By the way, this noted, a lot of people say, well, that was only during the years, and don't hold me to this, but 2003 to 2005. So if the home wasn't built then, we don't have an issue. That is true on a newer home. However, what if there's been renovations done and the renovations were done with Chinese drywall? Somebody did a repair, whatever. So you never can assume just upon year built only that it does or does not have Chinese drywall. Okay. Number 1, again in red. All right, it says, here's your chance, the seller, except as indicated below. Seller is stating this, that they have no knowledge except for these items. If they have any exceptions that they do know about, they need to list that there. If you represent the seller, make sure they do so. If you represent the buyer, make sure this is filled out before your buyer initials. All right. Paragraph 2, defective drywall. If you're at this stage, I would never suggest you waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment. Usually you're doing this because you already have notification that there may be an issue. So it's up to the buyer at the buyer's expense, may have a home inspector, licensed contractor, or other licensed professional to conduct an inspection or risk assessment of the property specific to the presence of Chinese drywall. Okay. Now again, look at this. See note at left. Like the mold inspection addendum, which we have discussed at other times, I suggest you give yourself a minimum of 5 days past the regular inspection. Let me talk about this briefly. A lot of times you're not even notified. You don't have an issue or notice that you need a Chinese drywall inspection specifically. But when the regular inspection is done, then all of a sudden the home inspector may say, hey, I saw some signs underneath the sink that look like, hey, there were some concerns that looked like it might be evidence that the Chinese drywall was here, right? So you don't want to have those dates where the home inspection and the drywall inspection end on the same day, because if you're doing this on the last day of the home inspection period, then you haven't given yourself enough time to get a professional in there. So I always suggest, at least, same thing with mold, I always want to extend it beyond the regular inspection, because a lot of times we don't think we need one, which a lot of times we don't need a mold and or a Chinese drywall inspection, but it becomes apparent to us that we do when all of a sudden the home inspector says, hey, look, there's some issues. Well, we want to give ourselves some time. So it's just a matter of preference to do that, and it makes sense to do that. But it has to be written in here, and I would do it, again, giving yourself at least a minimum of 5 days beyond the regular inspection period, all right? So if they do come up with something, all right, and and they inspect it, and it reveals damage to the property, in excess of blank. Now again, they defaults to $500. I think that's a fair amount. You can do whatever you and your buyer want to do. Realize this is not a repair limit. This doesn't mean that the seller has to fix it if it's 500 or below. It means that if it's below 500, the buyer's still going to buy the home. If it's above 500, specific to drywall items, then at that point, that's when the buyer has the right to back out. Now, you could put 0 in there if you want. Says that, hey, look, if it exceeds, if it's $1, and then I want to have the right to back out. So you can do that as well, but it's between you and your buyer. But realize it's not a repair limit for a seller to meet. It's a threshold that if it exceeds that, that's when the buyer has the right to cancel. All right. And then just note here again in red, if you, especially if you represent the buyer, if the buyer fails to timely cancel or fails to conduct the inspections, buyer may not terminate contract specific to Chinese drywall. All right, so don't miss that deadline. If you're using it, use the deadline and or do it. Okay. Note here real fast that if neither box is checked, then B is going to be defaulted to. All right, so if that somehow got left blank, then everybody's assuming B is there. Once again, as is all of these, if the deal fails to close, then the buyer shall repair all damages as a result of the inspection. And then once again, I put it down here. As always, be sure to have the buyer's research professionals in this area if there are Chinese drywall concerns. This waives them, coming back to us. Well, anybody can sue us for anything, but the reality is that you don't want to be the expert here. You're not a Chinese drywall expert. You just know how to lead them to other people. Encourage them to go get information from true sources. Remember, we always say, don't ever be the source, but be the source of the source. And that is great advice. So it kind of gives you that right. So if you do have Chinese drywall or some issues and you have some questions, as always, feel free to reach out. But this is pretty self-explanatory, but make sure your buyer really does their research and understands the effects and or many times now we're seeing homes, by the way, that are remediated Chinese drywall, meaning that they have already inspected and or they've found the issues and they have fixed them. And so by fixing them, you still want to have it inspected and potentially by someone specific to Chinese drywall and see if there's a transferable warranty, all these things, because you want to make sure that the repairs that were done properly. All right, hope this helps. And as always, like I said, reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.